I'm going to read tonight from the beginning of my most recent book, which is not published yet. It will be out in January of 2006. It's called The Thin Place. And in fact, the introduction was so appropriate to the locale, which is indeed a place where the membrane between worlds is very, very thin. So there's leakage back and forth. I'm going to read from the beginning of this new book so that I will not have to give you a lot of background information, which always seems tedious. I am, though, going to skip a couple of sections so that there are a lot of characters, and I want you to have the experience of coming back to some of them without meeting too many new ones before that happy occasion occurs. So anyway, without any further ado, this is the beginning of The Thin Place. There were 3 girlfriends, and they were walking down a trail that led to a lake. One small and plump, one pretty and medium-sized, one not so pretty and tall. This was in the early years of the 21st century. The unspeakable having happened so many times, everyone was still in shock, still reeling from what they'd seen, what they'd done or failed to do. The dead souls no longer wore gowns. They'd gotten loose, broadcasting their immense soundless chord through the precincts of the living. At the lake, the trail branched right and left. Right to the town beach, a grassy plot with 6 picnic tables, 2 stone grills, a pit toilet, a trash can, and a narrow strip of lumpy gray sand. Left to the knoll, where the overlarge houses of the rich nestled among shade trees and tasteful redwood play structures, and then back to town. Straight ahead was the boat ramp and the Crockett's chocolate lab, Buddy, going down shoulder first on a dead fish. Beyond the ramp was the water. The sky was the palest blue and fluttered over the girls' heads like a circus tent, at the apex of which the sun was pinned. It was a Saturday in mid-May, the sun only just starting to heat up, it being the northern latitudes. But even so, Mrs. Kipp had made sure they all wore sunblock. You couldn't be too careful. Like many objects of worship, the sun had grown impatient with its worshippers, causing some of them to sicken and die. As she larded on the sunblock, Mrs. Kipp informed them that these days only stupid people had tans. When they got to the beach, the 3 girls came to a halt. A very large man dressed in a pair of khaki shorts and not much else was lying on his stomach in the sand with his head facing the lake. From where the girls stood, they could see the bottoms of the man's feet, which looked smooth and white. Almost as if he were a baby, observed Lorna Fine, not only the tallest and least attractive, but also the most fanciful of the 3. The older Lorna got, the prettier she would become, but for now she was like a bespectacled monkey, wearing red and yellow plaid seersucker pants, and the vintage Ramones t-shirt she'd found in the back of her brother's closet under a stack of dirty magazines, so she was sure he wouldn't ask for it back. Sonny Crockett let out a loud sigh Lorna knew was meant to be overheard by anyone inconsiderate enough to be hogging the entire strip of sand, when obviously there were other people who wanted to use it. "It's Mr. Banner," said Mies Kipp. "Who?" Lorna asked. "Mr. Banner," said Mies, "from Sonny's church." She walked around to the man's right, where she planted herself, a small round thing in a pink tracksuit, in the sand next to his face. Mr. Banner's eyes were loosely shut, and his black eyeglasses were shoved up, so the left lens was wedged over the bridge of his nose, which was bruised and bleeding. His mouth was partly open, and a little foamy drool was coming out of it. There were several black fly bites, the first of the season, on his bald head, and 4 long, fine hairs were growing out of the middle of his nose, halfway between the bridge and the nostrils. Noon. The sun shone down. Mies leaned closer. Mr. Banner smelled like perspiration, but also sweet like cotton candy. And there was something about him, about the way he lay there so perfectly still, yet with a sense of something enormously alive inside him, something almost insanely teeming with slumberous hidden vitality deep inside that made her feel like she was looking at a cave full of sleeping bats. "Don't," said Lorna when Mies reached out a finger. "Don't touch him." "Germs?" guessed Sonny, but Lorna, a great fan of Agatha Christie, shook her head. "I don't think he's breathing," she said. "Look at his chest." Tentatively, she held her hand near the man's nose. "I think he's dead." The sand was coarse and gritty, the entire beach hard as a rock. If there were any footprints, Lorna couldn't make them out, though despite the trash can, there was a lot of trash on the ground, including cigarette butts and a beer bottle. Molson, Canadian. "We should do something," said Sonny. "We should get help." "You get help," Mies said. "I'm staying here." "It's not like he's going anywhere," Lorna pointed out. But once Mies had made her mind up, forget it. "Just try not to touch anything," Lorna added sternly, "okay?" Of course, Lorna knew perfectly well that the minute she and Sonny were out of sight, Mies would do just that. It had been so obvious, her hand visibly itching to touch the man's cheek. "Sure," Mies said. She nodded her small round face, a face that no doubt, due to its exceptionally round dark eyes and full bow lips, its fringe of dark hair and pronounced widow's peak, tended to remind people of a pansy. Such a sweet little flower with such a fierce expression. "Mr. Banner," Mies was thinking. "Mr. Banner, Mr. Banner, Mr. Banner, Mr. Banner. Think of me." That was what Pansy said in the language of flowers. Mun, Jan 1, 1872. Taught school. Bertie and Eve played dominoes. Tues, Jan 2. Taught school, went home at night, quilted my skirt in Eve. Wed, Jan 3. Taught school. Came home at night, hooked Bertie a mitten. Thurs, Jan 4. Taught school. Fry, Jan 5. Taught school. Sat, Jan 6. At home done housework. Aunt Tiny here all day. Son, Jan 7. At home all day, read some. George Wheeler and Hinkson here. Mun, Jan 8. Taught school. Went to singing class in Eve with Bertie. I hope it is not so. Out the window, the sun was shining on the lake, the whole surface a radiant copper blue pricked with dazzling specks of white. Out the window, sunshine and fresh breezes, a family of ducks riding the little swells near shore. Mallards, the dull brown mother and her cute yellow babies. I hope it is not so. Andrea Murdoch stiffened with the usual mix of impatience and affection as for the third time that morning she listened to her husband take the stairs from the second floor 2 at a time like a man half his age prior to yanking open the cellar door and sharpening his pencil in the sharpener he'd insisted on attaching to the wall just below the light switch. Sharpening and whistling the same 5-note phrase that came from nowhere and went nowhere over and over like bird song. Murdochs, since the dawn of time, had kept their pencil sharpeners at the head of the cellar steps. Taught school, chick-a-dee-dee-dee. What else was there for an unmarried woman to do, thought Andrea. At least Miss Fair had been lucky enough to have a profession. At least she wasn't stuck washing and churning and baking and cleaning and churning and chatting and washing and baking day in, day out, like the author of that last diary Andrea had restored, though this one's pages were in worse condition, ready to flake away at the lightest touch. Lucky Miss Inez Fair, Andrea thought grimly, peeling end paper from coverboard, young and unmarried and teaching school. Andrea